Okay, welcome to the session, everyone. In the last two readings, what we've covered is microeconomics. Microeconomics was limited to the first two readings. Now, after understanding what is demand supply and what is the market structure, we now move to macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is all about how the entire economy works and how various economies work. And what are the macroeconomic factors which are very important and essential for us to understand. So basically, we'll be here, focusing on various factors like inflation, GDP, interest rates, how government manages taxes and monetary policy, basically fiscal and monetary policy, currencies, and so many different things. Everything that, these are basically the decisions at the top level. That's what we understand macroeconomics as. So let's start with understanding what macroeconomics is. If microeconomics was behavior of an individual or a particular business, macroeconomic is the aggregate behavior of everyone, households, firms, and markets. What do you mean by aggregate? The total, correct? So microeconomics focuses on individual behavior, macroeconomics focuses on the total behavior, correct? What is it going to analyze? As I said, aggregate output and income, which is nothing but related to GDP. Competitive and comparative advantages. So here we are going to compare that why a particular economy is better than another economy and what are the reasons. Productivity of labor force. What do you mean by productivity? Anyone? Productivity? Yes. Everyone? What do you mean by productivity? Have you heard about this word productivity? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So what is productivity is how efficiently the labor is being utilized. How efficiently the labor is utilized, right? That is productivity. So for example, if I do education, I can perform better. That is productivity. So if you make 10 goods and I also make 10 goods only, but if we both come together and we make better, that is what productivity is. So how efficiently the labor can be utilized to generate output, that is productivity. Otherwise, everyone will be producing the same good. So basically skills and technology is what brings productivity. Remember that skill and technology brings productivity. It means that you don't have to, basically every labor will be coming up with more skills. So the efficiency level will increase. Then, as I said, we are going to discuss about the levels of inflation, unemployment, very important, consumption, government spending and investment, and all these things from the economy perspective, overall economic activity. These are all economic activities which we are going to focus on. Now, the way we measure macroeconomics, basically our entire focus here is going to be, majorly our focus is going to be the aggregate output. Aggregate output, many people call it as GDP also. Why? Because it is the total value of goods and services produced in a particular period, which can be 1 year. So what is aggregate output? Output means production, how much you have produced, not sold. So the total amount of goods and services that a particular economy has produced in a particular year or a period is called aggregate output, total output, correct? So output means production. The same can be calculated. The overall economic activity can also be measured with another thing that is called aggregate income. Now, income of everyone who all are there in the economy and their income. For example, the value of all the payments earned by the suppliers of factor of production. Can you tell me what are the factors of production? What do you need to produce?
Labor capital.
Labor capital, land or property.
Land, yes.
And then entrepreneurship or technology and other things, right? So see, what does a labor want? Compensation for wages, correct? What do you need for a property or a land? Rent? Is that the income? Yes or no?
Yes.
What do you require for capital? Interest rates. And what do you require for entrepreneurship? Profits. So these are the four broad forms of payments that you require for factors of production, right? So all those money generated from that in the entire economy is called aggregate income. Is that clear? Aggregate output, total amount of goods and services produced. Aggregate income, total amount of income earned by the suppliers of these factors of production. Is that clear? Everyone?
Yes.
And then you have aggregate expenditure, another method, which tells you the total amount of not amount earned, but the total amount spent on purchasing these goods and services. Oh, sorry, producing these goods and services. So one is the value of goods and services, and second is the total amount spent on the production of these goods and services. Right? Now, they just are all three different angles of measuring the economic output, the economic activity. Basically, you can say GDP. So I'll repeat, there are three ways of doing it. First, you find the value of all goods and services produced, that is aggregate output. Second, you also calculate the amount of goods and services spent, the amount spent on the goods and services produced. So the value of goods and services and the amount spent on its production. They both are the same. One is aggregate output, another is aggregate expenditure. Expenditure means the amount spent. And aggregate income is the amount that you have earned to produce these goods and services, which is nothing but the income that you pay to the factors of production. Clear? Well, if calculated correctly, they all three should be same. Very important. They all should be same. Right? So when we calculate for the economy, what is the aggregate amount of goods and services produced, that is aggregate output, that should be perhaps similar to aggregate income or aggregate expenditure. For the entire economy, it should be one and the same thing. However, there are some statistical differences, but otherwise, theoretically, they all should be perfectly equal. Clear? So our focus is going to be on this part, the aggregate output. And when I say aggregate output, basically I mean what? The GDP. Clear? We have heard this measure a lot of times, isn't it? GDP, right?
Yeah.
What GDP basically means is the total amount of goods and services produced. If you look from the aggregate output method, or the income earned, or the amount spent, it's one and the same thing. But the most famous way that we generally use is the aggregate output way. That is the total amount of goods and services produced within an economy in a particular period. For example, let's say last year, Indian economy produced total goods and services, whether they produce it to sell in your country or outside the country or not even consume. But the total amount of goods and services produced, not sold. Produce. That's important thing. Indian economy last year, produced around $2.7 trillion worth of goods and services. That's the value of goods and services produced by Indian economy. Well, that's the India's GDP. Is that clear? It measures the flow of output and income in the economy. It represents the broadest measure of the value of economic activity. So when someone tells me how is India's economy doing, that means what is the most important thing that I have to focus on? What is that indicator? It's
GDP.
The GDP. Clear? Because GDP considers everything that's happening in the economy. So GDP is the biggest and the most important economic activity measurement. Clear? Everyone?
Yeah.
Now, there are some important things that we need to consider while calculating the GDP of the economy. And before I proceed, let me tell you, there is not an exact way, and every country has difference in their method of calculation also, okay? So it's not completely perfect. Remember that. So to ensure consistency across countries, because as I said, every country has their own way of calculating, only count the goods and services produced during the measurement period. So within a particular period, not something that you have sold, which may be from the last year also, right? You may sell something which may be produced in the last year also, right? We are not going to take that. We are only going to take whatever is. Yes?
Produced this year. Last year.
In the current
Sorry.
year.
Current year.
Not last year, in the current year, right? And one more important thing, count the goods and services whose value can be determined. Now, something whose value you can determine and then you can sell it in the market. For example, you know what, I'm doing gardening at my home. Now that's an activity, but am I actually I'm planting, you know, flowers in my garden just for my own sake. I'm not selling it. I'm not producing it to sell it. I'm just doing it. And that economic activity, will that be a part of the GDP calculation?
No.
No, that should not be, right? Use the market value of final goods and services, not the market value, basically what price it will be sold in the market. So these three important things you have to consider. First, you have to calculate only those which are produced in the current period, something whose value can be determined, and that value should be the market value. Clear? These three important things. Okay, I'll just highlight here again. What are the three important things, everyone? Produced during the measurement period, whose value can be determined, and use only market value of final goods and services. These are the three important points. Clear? Now, apart from this, there are also few other things that we need to consider, which means what is exactly included and what is not included. So I'll first focus on what should be included. All goods and services, as I said, produced during the measurement period, whose value can be determined, only the market value. These 3 points we have covered, right? But one more important point that you have to cover is that owner-occupied housing and government services. Now, these are two things. Owner-occupied houses means the house where you are staying, you are consuming it, right? You haven't produced it to sell, isn't it?
Yes.
But still, you can give it on rent and make money, right? Correct? I repeat, still you can give it rent and make money, or you can sell it and earn some capital gains. Clear?
Yes.
So therefore, these two large sections are included in GDP, even if you are consuming it. First is the owner occupied houses, which means your and my home is also a part of GDP. And the second is government services. For example, government gives us services in the form of police, defense, healthcare, etc., right? All the services that government gives us are also the money spent by the government on a large scale. Correct? If not government, someone else would be providing you security for which you would be paying them, isn't it? So if government services are part of the economic activity, even though they may not be charged to us directly. For example, for the police, I don't have to pay for the police. I don't have to pay for the army directly, right? But that does consider as a part, that is considered as a part of the economic activity. So two important things: your house, owner occupied housing, and government services are included in the GDP computation. Is that clear, everyone?
Yes.
Now, what all things are not included? Of course, the one which are in the previous year, transfer payments. Now, in many countries, for example, during the pandemic time, government did transfer $1,000 paycheck to all the citizens of US, right? So any amount that the government transfers, to individuals in the form of aid or a subsidy or a donation, well, that's not a part of your GDP. Clear, everyone? Because that's not an economic activity. That's not being done for producing something. Is that clear? Yes or no?
Yes.
Any doubts here? Let me know.
Like any benefits.
Any benefits that benefits in the terms of, no, see, I told you that the government services are also the benefits. The cash that the government transfers you many times in your account, for example, unemployment checks that we receive, will that be a part of economy or not? Well, as I said, any transfer payment that government does from their account to individuals for any form of relief, that's not called, that's not a part of GDP. Okay. And unrealized gains and losses, for example, capital gains that accrue individuals when their assets appreciate. So you have gold and I have real estate, and if our values have appreciated, that unrealized gain and loss will not be a part of GDP. Clear? Right? Also, non-market activities for one's own benefit, as cooking, cleaning, and as I said, gardening and all that, they are not part of your GDP. Including underground economy are excluded from GDP. Underground economy means What do we have that name in India? The black economy, right? The black money. That's what we name, right? Well, it's
Yes.
not part of the economy. For example, people do betting on cricket in India or football. That's illegal activity, or anything that happens illegal, like the drug trafficking or human trafficking. All these are illegal activities which are not the part of GDP. Many countries in the world, for example, as far as I remember, India's contribution to one of the data said that India's contribution to GDP, the underground economy's contribution to India's GDP was around 24%. So almost 1/4 of India's economy is officially the underground economy. Well, I don't believe that. I believe it's much higher. Okay. Of course, things are changing now, but I believe that's much higher, because when we buy property in India, what is that the builders or the construction companies used to tell us before? Do you remember anything? Well, they used to tell us that the ratio is 60/40 or 50/50. What does it mean? Any idea? Yes, no?
No.
Well, whenever you used to buy property in India 5 or 10 years back at least, and even today to many extent in the interiors of the country, the property developers ask you for a 60/40. Means that if the property's value is $100,000, $60,000 will be the agreement value. The rest $40,000 you pay me in cash, which is not accounted for, because that's the illegal money. That's what we call as a black economy. You're getting it?
Yes.
So that was widespread in Indian economy. Now, I don't say that is completely disappeared, but it has been shaken very heavily after the demonetization that India had in 2016, where the currency bills were, taken back from the economy, the higher version of currency bills. So of course, it was all debatable whether it's a right decision or not, but it did shake up the black economy for at least a while, I think so. Got it, everyone? So that's not a part of your GDP. Clear? Any questions? Anyone?
Any like resell products,
Any?
like resold.
A resold? No. See, the thing is that first we are going to compute anything which is produced. That word is important, produced. So we are not calculating something that is being bought and sold again and again. So whatever is that you produce in a particular, for example, let's say someone had produced a particular goods 5 years back. So that was already included in that GDP, right? Now it cannot be again and again included in the GDP. Because see, whatever goods, some goods are being produced to sold again and again and again. So they will be recounted every year. Now that's not the case. For example, let's say I produced a property. I constructed a building this year. So it is already accounted in the GDP. Now, if I keep on repeating that every year, someone buys a property and sells, buys and sells, buys and sells. Now that's not going to be a part of the GDP, right? Because GDP includes either the amount produced or the amount spent or the income earned. So our major focus is on the goods which are produced within a year, not they are resold. Clear?
Okay.
Okay. Now, when I say the amount of income earned, it is who all are there in the country and what do they earn. So for example, the GDP approach, there are two major approaches that we are going to see, the income and the expenditure approaches. The income approach focuses on the total income earned by everyone, households, business, and even the government. So in the economy, everyone, whatever the money they earn, whether the companies or the individuals or the government, all the income that they have earned in a particular year by salaries or by profits or by whatever dividends, all those incomes are calculated. That is the income approach. The expenditure approach, as I said, is the amount spent on the goods and services which are produced, not resold. Got it? Right?
Yes.
Also called the value of final output approach, value of final goods. Now, what is the value of final goods? First of all, you know what, if you look at directly, if I go here, the sum of value approach, sum of value added approach, which is the total of all the values. For example, let's say the goods that are being produced here, what is the production here? Stages of production: raw materials, manufacturing, retail. That's the production level, right? Now, first a goods is you take a raw material, then you do the manufacturing of it, and then you spend on the retail. Now, the total value here is the total price, you can say, of the good is how much? 325. So from raw material, from the basic raw material to the manufacturing part, when the goods goes to the manufacturing, its value become from 100 to 250. 250 first, from raw material to manufacturing. So let's say I bought a plastic which was $100. Now, when it goes to the factory, raw plastic, when it goes to the factory and it is being produced there, it is being manufactured, that plastic turns up into a bottle which becomes 250. Now that bottle, when it is sold in the market, actually in the retail shops, it becomes 325. So what is the final price of the bottle?
320.
325. Now that is the sum of all the value. But in between the stages, what has the increase in the value? For example, at the raw material stage, it was 100. When it went to the manufacturing stage, additional 150 was added. That's the value added. Clear? Got it? Then, because raw material was 100, 150 happened during the manufacturing, maybe due to the labor and factory overheads. Therefore, it became 250. Is that clear? Yes or no?
Yes.
Then when it went to the retail, there was a markup of how much? 75 when it went to the retail, and therefore the total became 325. Clear? Everyone. So what is the approach that we use? We use the value of the final output approach, where either the GDP is calculated as a sum of all the values, the final value, right? Or the value added. So you either take the final value or the value added. Both will result in the same amount. Is that clear? So if I take the final value of the bottle, it will be 325. Then I don't have to take the individual value. And if I'm taking the individual values, then I just have to take the value addition, the incremental value at every stage. Clear? Will both be different? No, both will give me the same output. Correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, if you take all the goods in the economy and assume that you are using the value added approach, is it so easy to actually calculate, for every goods and services that is being produced in the economy? Of course, it is not. It's so much of a data, right? So, and where am I going to get such a large scale data? Well, from the government sources. And it's not always up to date. So the official GDP data, which is the largest captured data, I should say, is completely not reliable, because it is perhaps not possible to capture so much of large data without some data biases or without some errors. So what are the problems in the GDP calculation? First, failure to capture everything. Tell me, in a country like 1.4 billion people, or even China, it's not possible to calculate every economic activity, right? You can't calculate everything. You can calculate the organized sector, but not the unorganized sector, isn't it? Right? Second, the data collection process is not that fast or not that perfect, because does everyone do transaction in India through banks only? No, then it's very difficult to capture the it's very difficult to account for each and every economic activity. Does everyone in India pay the goods and services tax? No. Does everyone in India pay tax? No. Then you know what, how am I going to find out that data? then it's not very easy to do that. Okay, so that's the second thing, poor collection of data problem. And then even if you have all the data, what statistical methods you apply, even that becomes an issue, because the way GDP is calculated, as I said, is not consistent across the economy. So first, there is problem to get the data. Second, the data collection practices are not reliable. And the third, that the statistical methods you apply are also not reliable if everything else is okay also. Clear? So we know all this reality or the real problems with GDP calculation. Still, GDP is the best economic indicator to measure the economic output. Is that clear? Everyone?
Yes.
Any questions till this point?
No.
So now let's move towards the most important section, that is what exactly GDP measurement is. Well, we know from the quants, the Fisher effect, which tells us that nominal interest rate is a combination of two things: real interest rate and
Inflation.
inflation. In the same way, nominal GDP is a combination of two things: real GDP and inflation. So let's say the value of, let's say I have 5 goods: a book, a pen, a water bottle, my phone, and let's say, what else? Let's say gold. I have 5 things. Okay, book, pen, water bottle, gold, and a phone. Now this year, 1 unit of everyone was produced, let's say at $10. So my total GDP was $50. Clear? That is my GDP. Now next year, even if I produce the same thing, right? Of course, the amount will still not be the same, right? It won't be $10 for each, correct? Some of the goods value will increase due to the demand, high demand, or any supply constraint, isn't it? Yes.
Yes.
But some of the goods value will also increase because the overall inflation has increased, because the value of currency has gone down. What do you mean by that? For example, let's say you have a $10 bill and you go to buy 1 kg of apple, which was at $10, you get 1 kg. But after a year, when the apple prices are increasing, in the same $10, you won't get 1 kg, you will get less of it.
Yes.
So is it the, technically what do we say? We say the apple's prices are increased, right? Apple prices have increased, right? But theoretically, we can also say that the value of that $10 bill has reduced. Because initially that $10 used to buy 1 kg of apple. Now that $10 is not worth enough that it buys 1 kg of apple. Can I not say that?
Yes.
Are you getting it? What am I trying to say? Divesh?
Yes.
Dipti?
Yes.
So what did I tell y'all? That I could buy 1 kg of apple with that $10. Okay. But now next year I cannot buy 1 kg of apple with $10. I may have to pay more. So I can say either the goods value have increased or the value of that $10 has reduced. Both can be due to inflation. So after accounting for inflation, after removing the inflation related factor, what is the real increase in the price of that good? That is called real GDP. So nominal GDP is the value of goods and services at their current price, today's price, and today's price does include inflation. So nominal GDP does include the inflation. Clear? On the other end, real GDP is also measures the current year output using the prices at the base year. So I'm going to use the previous prices, not today's price. Very important. Nominal GDP uses current price, today's price, which does include inflation. Real GDP uses prices from the base year, and therefore it eliminates the inflation effect. So all in all, nominal GDP includes inflation or not?
Nominal includes inflation.
So the value of goods that you see in nominal terms, that does include the inflation. But if you want to remove inflation from it, how to do that, we'll understand. We do that by a factor called GDP deflator. But by doing that, what do we get? We get real GDP. Now, what is the biggest difference between nominal and real GDP? As I said, it is because of inflation. Most of the countries have positive inflation, except few like Japan, which has negative inflation, which is called deflation. So assume every country in the economy has positive inflation. So what will be higher, nominal or real?
Nominal.
Nominal GDP will always be higher than real GDP. And by how much percentage it is higher, that is called GDP deflator. Now, GDP deflator is an index value. Is it index value which converts dash into dash, which converts nominal GDP into real GDP. And to convert from nominal to real, what do I have to remove? What do I have to remove? The effect of changes in price, which is nothing but inflation. Clear? How do we do that? And after that, I'll come to per capita GDP, not now. How do we do that? For example, in 2017, the real GDP of UAE was $462 billion and nominal GDP was 502. So what is the GDP deflator? It is the factor which is the difference between the nominal and the real GDP in percentage terms. So how am I going to do that? See, this nominal GDP was 502 divided by 462, that is the real GDP, and if I multiply that with 100, why? Because this is an index value. So you get 108.658. This is nothing but 8.658 percentage. Correct. That is due to this difference is actually due to
Inflation.
So the factor that is 108 in 2017. How much is that in 2018? I will do 530 divided by 485 into 100. Now the factor is 109.2784. Is the index, has the index value increased or decreased?
Increased.
What does it indicate? If it has increased, that the
inflation
is increasing.
Increasing.
Clear? So in the third year, if I use 528 divided by 481 into 100, I get a value of 109.7713. That's the index value. So where did the index value, where was the index value last year?
109.27.
Correct. And in the current year, it is 109.7713. Right? So in between 2018 and 19, what was the change in the index in percentage term? From 109.727, it went to 109.77. So just find out the percentage change here. How would you do that? -1 into 100. So if I do this, this is nothing but I can say 0.45 percentage. So what is this 0.45 percentage? It is a change in the deflator, GDP deflator. These are my GDP deflators, right? That is GDP deflator is the index for inflation. So the index for inflation changed from 109.27 to 109.77 in a year. Well, that change in the GDP deflator is nothing, but that percentage change is nothing, but that's the inflation. Is that clear?
Yes.
So next time, every government publishes GDP deflator. That's an index value. So even in India, we have indexation. For indexation, we use the same thing. So that change in that index value provided by the government also, that is for you the inflation. Clear? So last year, whether it was 100, now it has become 102. So that change in the GDP deflator is your inflation for the current year. Clear? Everyone? So what is nominal GDP? What is real GDP? Why is there a difference? Because of inflation. And how do we calculate that? Through an index called GDP deflator. And the change, percentage change in that index is your inflation. Is that clear, everyone?
Yes.
Now, what is real GDP? Now, let me tell you some, before I go to nominal and real GDP, just see here. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the nominal GDP in billions of dollars. Let me take you to the rank 1, which is the world's largest economy by all means. Sorry. By all means,
Yes.
it is United States, which has a GDP of around $22 trillion, followed by China, which has around $17 trillion. Then you have Japan, Germany, United Kingdom, and also India. Now, India is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sixth largest economy, much better than France and Italy and Canada and Korea. So total GDP, the total amount of goods and services produced, based on that, India is in the top 10. But do you think that India as an economy is rich?
No.
Why? Because see, we have 1.4 billion people. So it is very natural for us to produce such a huge scale. Correct? But compared to that, Canada, which I think has 1/10 of India's population, right, produces so high. So on a per capita basis, see, on a per capita basis, where does Canada stand? 19. And where does India stand? 144. Are you getting my point?
Yes.
Why is US so dominating in the world? Because in the nominal as well as on the per capita basis, US is in the top 10. Being such a large economy, producing so high, and also on a per capita basis, means on a population basis. And you know, if you take the GDP and divide it by the population, on the population basis also US GDP per capita is better. So what do you think should be the better measurement? GDP nominal? Yes, it should be there. We don't disagree with GDP nominal, but if you want to see the standard of the economy's progress, then you should be watching at GDP
Per capita.
per capita. Correct.
Which is the first
Haha. Which is the
country ranking?
country as per you? Tell me the most beautiful countries, one of the most beautiful countries that you would have imagined. Very scenic and beautiful. Tell me few. Come on. You don't have to rethink so much.
UAE?
No, scenic, beautiful. Concrete, with concrete you can make. I'm not saying UAE is not beautiful. UAE is beautiful. But
Turkey?
okay, Turkey. What else? Come on, keep saying. There are 190 countries.
Switzerland?
Switzerland. Why Switzerland? Switzerland is beautiful.
Yeah.
Then Switzerland is on the top. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
And rank 2, Switzerland, Norway, Denmark, Scandinavian nations, Singapore from Asia, Australia. These are the countries. So mostly European nations are in the top in the GDP per capita, but you don't see the rank 1. You know why? And whatever is that country rank 1 is not there in the list. Do you know why?
No.
Because in the GDP per capita, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh is on the right in the bottom. We are at the bottom, very much bottom, because we have high population and low GDP total. Where is the rank 1? Well, rank 1 is a country whose total GDP is very small, but GDP per capita is number 1. And you know which country that is? That is Qatar. Qatar is the world's richest country in per capita GDP. Okay, Qatar is the richest country in per capita GDP, which means its population is very tiny compared to the wealth. Qatar is the world's largest exporter of LNG, liquefied natural gas. It's a small, very tiny country, much smaller than many of the European or Indian or Asian cities. But it's the world's largest exporter of so many things. In fact, one of the world's largest media companies, Al Jazeera, is from Qatar. Qatar Airways, and the Qatar oil companies, they are booming. Got it? So
Yes.
that's what, and it's a very small family there. The royal family and the Qataris are very small in numbers. In fact, around 90% of the people in Qatar are from which nation? Do you know that? Hold yourself. 90% of people in Qatar are not Qataris. They are Indians.
Really?
Surprised? Yes, 90% of people in Qatar are outsiders, which includes maximum Indians, especially from the state of Kerala. So the Keralites dominate the Middle East. This is what I've seen. They are in various activities, in various jobs. So the economic activity of the Middle East, especially the service sector, is and the manufacturing sector is highly, construction sector is highly dominated by laborers, skilled and unskilled, both from the Southeast Asian economy. Clear?
Yes.
So yeah, that's what I wanted to share. So clear with what is real nominal GDP and GDP per capita and everything. GDP per capita is basically when you divide the GDP for based on the population size. It tells you the average standard of living. Clear? So India may be in top 5 or 10 in terms of GDP total, but what we really need to progress is on GDP per capita. That it will tell you how many people you have uplifted from poverty. Okay. So this is what we've covered, nominal real GDP. And now we are going to focus on the components of GDP. How is the GDP? What exactly is included in the GDP? So can you repeat what is GDP? What is the meaning of GDP? The total amount of or the value of
Goods produced.
goods and services, not only
Services.
goods and
Produced
services
during the year.
produced during the year. Correct? That's what we will be focusing on, the aggregate output. Now, the basic equation of GDP is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Many people are aware about this. What is C? C is consumption spending, means what you and I spend. How much we spend as consumers. I is the investment in the economy. Who does investment in the economy? Well, the business does investment in the economy in terms of buying equipments, buying machinery, right? Spending on properties for their business activities. So, or basically raw materials. That those are all the business investments that the companies do. So I stands for investment from the business fraternity. G G is for government purchases. Even the government buys, right? Now, government does actually spend. What does government exactly spend for? Let's say government is doing some spending. Why does it do? I mean, what exactly it does that for?
To boost the economy.
No, but where? That's
Like
it.
subsidiaries.
Yeah. Subsidiaries, for example, they created roads for us, basic infrastructure for us, so that we can use it. Clear?
Yes.
But they also are in various businesses, isn't it? For example, governments also create various goods and services which they charge from us, so that the economic activity is running. So governments also spend on consumption as well as on investment. Clear? So the I plus G, what you saw, also exists not only for individuals but for government also. There is I plus sorry, my mistake. The I plus C, consumption and investment, that you see, this I plus C is for individuals, right? So for the governments also, I can say there is I plus C, isn't it? For the governments also, there can be I plus C, which can be government income, government investment plus government consumption, isn't it? Individuals or business in the economy, they consume and they invest. So what government also does with the money, it also invests and consumes.
Consumes.
So C plus I plus G, I'll repeat, C is consumption, I is investment, and G, which is government purchases, which is nothing but, come on. You know what, today I feel
Government investments and spending.
has to, I don't know why you all are not repeating or not asking as many as doubt. It's only you who ask the doubt most of the times. Or maybe I'm the best teacher in the world, maybe. That can be the case. So G is where the government what the government consumes or what it invests.
Yes.
Clear?
Yes.
Most important equation this is, and today's most of the topic will be based on this equation. Then the third, after the third component, the last component that you see is X minus M. It's called net exports. Basically, it is exports minus imports. X for exports and M for imports. Clear? So the GDP equation, I will say here, the GDP equation I will rewrite is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Here, X minus M is our net exports. If there is higher imports, then that part will be negative. If there are higher exports, then your GDP will increase. Clear? So what are the reasons due to which the GDP can increase? If the consumer starts spending more. One. If the business starts investing more. Two. Correct? Third, if they both don't, see, first of all, if the consumers are not spending, will the business invest?
No.
No. Then who will have to come in?
Government.
Governments will come in, they will consume and they will spend. For example, government will boost the economy by creating roads and bridges and giving so many employments to so many people. Clear? This is what was also suggested by a professor called John Maynard Keynes. That's why it's called Keynesian theory. Have you heard about this? Keynesian theory. This guy got Nobel Prize in economics. He was the one who pulled out the US from the 1929 Great Depression. He suggested that if the economy is not running, why don't the government interfere and boost it? Government should start, spending on infra and so many things. Are you getting it?
Yes.
Or you should get a good chunk from foreign selling, that is exports and imports. Exports minus imports. Clear, everyone?
Yes.
Now, I have something to share based on this. I don't know whether I should share it now or not, but I'll see if I can share. And that has got to do. Okay. Let me see if I can share this image. So this is when I went to my trip in Germany in 2017. This is the Brandon Gate in the gate, the entrance gate of Germany, Berlin. The top picture that you see is the devastation that happened in 1945 during the World War II. Germany was almost finished. And today you see Germany is the most strongest economy in Europe, right?
Yes.
Two biggest economy which were completely devastated in the Second World War. Which were those two economies which were completely devastated? They lost the war and their infra was completely gone. Their population, 1/5 of their population was gone. Which were those two economies?
France.
No. I don't want your history and geography also to be weak. Okay. I can understand finance being weak, but history and geography should be strong. Come on. Which country faced a nuclear bomb ever in life? Has any country faced 2 nuclear bombs on their soil? No country has faced. Which country? How can you forget? No?
Germany, Italy.
Has Germany faced nuclear bombs?
No.
No, Deepti, you can't
But
be. Only Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were dropped. Are you aware about this or not?
yes. Sorry. I was just thinking when you
Nuclear.
showed the picture, so I was thinking about the
See, there was a
World
war started in Europe, but its repercussions were severely
Yes.
in the other parts of the world also. Japan was the only country and is the only country to face 2 nuclear bomb attacks, isn't it?
Yes.
Completely surrendered and devastated, Germany and Japan. They were attacked by the Allied forces from all corners. This happened in 1945. At the year of 1945, these countries were almost finished, right? But let me tell you a fact that by 1960, both the countries were already developed countries. Can you believe that? Within a decade or so, both the countries were not developing. They were developed economies. No one pays attention to this. Hello, everyone?
Yes.
So this is what happened. Okay. Now I'm not going to discuss why. I'll discuss that at a later point because I don't want your lecture to be interrupted. But more interesting than this is another story, which I should tell you, is that during the First World War, which started from 1914 till 1919, I think. Okay, till 1918 or 19, the First World War was going. Again, Germany lost the First World War, and that was the entire reason that there were so many restrictions on Germany that they were frustrated, and that led to World War II. Correct? That led to the rise of Hitler's popularity because they were frustrated with the atrocities or the hard restrictions by the Allied forces on Germany, because as a compensation for starting the war, the German people had to bear so much that during the 1920s, more than a quarter of Germany's population, which I believe was under extreme poverty. They were starving, hungry, badly. This was the case in
First one.
No, I'm using some years also. I think either you all are sleeping in the stories or not listening carefully. Every story that I'm saying is due to some reason. I don't want to harass you all in the early morning with some random stories. I'm telling everything for some reason, and I'm going to connect that with our topic. So listen it carefully, everyone. In 1920s, I said after the World War, that is around 1920s, 21 and 22, Germany was almost, on the verge of, it was bankrupt nation. There was a Treaty of Versailles, which was being signed by Germany, according to which it was being forced to sign that treaty. According to that treaty, France, Britain, and other nations, they had put a lot of conditions and penalties on Germany for starting the First World War, and that had to be paid by the German people. So German people were starving and very, very much in a very much critical and bad condition. So there was anger in the German people against all this thing, right? Because before that, Germany was under, I think Germany was more under the king, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it was a kingdom, and why people should suffer for it. So that was the situation. So tell me a country, and this is something for you all to think when you go back after the session. A country which was starving, 1/4 of its population was starving in 1920s and 22s. The same country was ready for a war with entire world by 1940s. Within 20 years, a starving nation to the most developed economy by by 1940. So much so that I think in 1938, Germany hosted Olympics where Dhyan Chand went and got gold for India in hockey. Are you getting my point? So no one researches this part, that what happened to Germany. Everyone talks about Hitler did this, Hitler did that. Okay, he has done all these atrocities and all, and which were devastating. That's one discussion. But from the economic point of view, what happened in Germany during 1920s and 40s, that from a starving nation, Germany became the most developed economy, so much so that a tiny nation in Europe was ready to fight the world. Can you believe that? And during that era, the German government started few companies and promoted few companies which are till today one of the best companies in the world. Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, their their Air Force, which was the most feared Air Force in the world during the Blitzkrieg. The most feared Air Force in the world during World War II was German Air Force. And of course, the British Air Force, also the Royal Air Force. But the German Air Force was the most feared. Do you know what they did after the World War? That Air Force, German Air Force name was Luftwaffe. What was its name? Luftwaffe. That Luftwaffe is now Lufthansa. Okay. So those companies which were there in the World War II also, the Volkswagen, the Mercedes, the Lufthansa, they're still there today. So I think that's a quality of Germans' business. It must be interrupted, but it did not ever succumb. So ever you get time, research on what happened during 1920 and 1940, and no books will tell you this. All books will tell you that there were atrocities in Germany and all, which no one disagrees. It was very bad what happened with the Jews, especially. It was very sad. And I have visited Hungary and I've seen those places. There were and I've been to the east-west German border also to see what was the so-called atrocities unfortunately being committed on the Jews. I've seen that. I've been to the museum and all that, and I've seen those shoes still lying there before they were pushed into the Danube River and all. I've seen that. Those were very symbolic things that you can feel it when you go there, that how badly they were treated. But I'll just tell you one thing, that from the economic point of view, what happened in Germany that those 20 years during the First World War, after the First World War and after the Second World War also, that Germany bounced back within 10-15 years to be the world's most developed economy. What is the magic, that they have? Are you getting my point? As per me, and I can be completely wrong also, but as per me, it's this part. The German government exclusively started spending in their economy, whether it was for the construction of military equipments or whatever, right? It was for the construction of tanks or aircrafts, but they did that. Okay, no wonder today world's biggest aircraft manufacturing is also from a part of the European Union, of course, but based out from Germany, that is Airbus, which is a stiff competitor to Boeing. So at one end you have Boeing and the other end you have Airbus. So all these are so-called brilliant German products. You got my point? So C plus I, consumption and investment from the business, but G is government purchases, which can be government consumption and government investment. Is that clear? Yes or no? No?
Yes.
Okay. So therefore, I've written the equation down. If you notice that G, I've expanded into government consumption and government investment. Clear? So when I add government consumption and government investment, I replace that instead of G What happens now? I have two consumption and two investments, one from business and government, another investment from business and government, and consumption from business and government. Is that clear?
Yes.
So the second GDP equation is nothing but it's the same thing, but I've just expanded the government investment or government purchases into government consumption and government investment. Clear? So now basically I have consumption from individuals, business and government, and even investments from individual business and government. Basically everyone, what they consume in the economy, what they invest in the economy, or what they sell outside the economy or purchase from outside the economy. That's your GDP. So GDP is total amount of goods and services produced in a year, which can be for consumption, which can be for investment, or which can be for export import. Is that clear? Yes.
Yes.
This approach is called the expenditure approach of GDP. The expenditure approach. Remember these two equations, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. And that equation, when I expand the G, I get the government purchases is being converted into government consumption and government investment. Sorry. Government consumption and government investment. So this is the most important equation that we are going to use in the future for understanding GDP in detail. Remember this equation. If you want, you can just note it down. GDP is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. That's the most common equation, but I've expanded the G into government consumption and government investments. Clear? Very, very important equation. I will come back to this equation again and again. Clear? Mostly people in the world calculate GDP from the expenditure approach. Most of the economies use which approach? Expenditure approach. But there's also another approach which we understood, like aggregate output, aggregate expenditure, and aggregate income. In the same way, GDP is also calculated from the income approach, which considers income of the entire country, which is nothing but the national income, capital consumption allowance, and statistical discrepancy. First, before I come to national income, I'll come to what is capital consumption allowance. This is nothing but we say this as depreciation. Depreciation. Let's say you as a country have various assets, physical assets, right? A depreciation is nothing but the allocation of the charges. So basically the wear and tear of those physical assets, which is a non-cash, even that is considered here. So it measures the depreciation of physical capital from the production of goods and services, basically the machinery and equipments that you have used in the economy. The wear and tear of that that particular assets is called the capital consumption allowance, which is nothing but the depreciation. From the production of goods and services over a period of time, known as an amount that would have to be reinvested to maintain the productivity. So for future production, you'll have to have some amount so that you can maintain this equipments and maintain these resources. For that, what provision you require is called the capital consumption allowance, which is nothing but depreciation. Clear? Now comes what is national income. National income is the income of everyone. Now, I just discussed income from the ones who provide you the factors of production, which are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, right? So, what is national income? It is the compensation required for employees, which is for labor, right? Profits are for corporates and governments for the entrepreneurship, right? Interest income for capital. Then along with interest, there is also rent. I'll first come to rent. Rent is for land or property. And now comes to other things. Unincorporated business net income means those businesses which are not registered, not organized. Even their profit should be taken into account. Okay. even their income should be taken into account. Is that clear? Because
Yes.
there are many businesses which are not completely accounted for. They are completely unorganized and they may not be visible to you, but even those are the part of national income. Clear? And then government also makes some income through taxes, less subsidies. Clear? So this is the national income received by all the factors of production that goes into the creation of the product. So compensation by employees, rents, interest income. Then you have profits from the business side or from the government side, unincorporated business profits, and basically indirect taxes and subsidies. Indirect taxes, okay? Indirect taxes basically means those taxes which are applied on goods and services, like value added tax, VAT, or goods and services tax, GST, right? These are service taxes or sales tax. These are all the indirect taxes on the goods and services. Clear?
Yes.
Right? All that is national income. By the way, as you must have noticed, this is very difficult to calculate, isn't it? Compared to the expenditure approach, where import and export data can be easily found, the amount that people are spending, C, plus the amount that the government is spending, or the investments in through the financial investments or financial or non-financial products, that is easy to calculate compared to the income approach. So the income approach is generally difficult to calculate. Which one is an easier approach? Expenditure approach. But should the GDP be different when calculated using an income or an expenditure approach?
No.
They should be same. They should be same. But will they be exactly same? No. At times they are not same. And the biggest difference is between due to the income approach. Therefore, you have one additional thing in the calculation of GDP using the income approach, that is the statistical discrepancy. By the name itself, you must have gauged what is statistical discrepancy. It is an adjustment for the difference between the GDP measured using the income approach and the expenditure approach because of the different data. Is that clear? Correct. So two approaches to calculate GDP.
Expenditure and income approach.
Expenditure and income approach. The income approach is the national income plus the depreciation, that is a non-cash, plus any statistical discrepancy, which is actually the difference between the income and the expenditure approach. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Now comes few important terms like personal income and personal disposable income. Personal income and personal disposable income means the income of yours and mine. Personal income, it is a measure of pre-tax income received by households, which is, let's say, your salary, your pre-tax salary that you receive. That is your you and your husband and your entire family. Whatever is the pre-tax money that you will receive is called the personal income. It tells you that how much is your purchasing power. It is one of the determinant of consumer purchasing power and consumption. So it affects directly C. Clear? Personal income differs from national income. National income and personal income are different because national income, in that personal income includes all the income that households receive, including government transfers such as unemployment or disability benefit. Yes. So if you recollect the GDP calculation, did it include the transfer payments?
No.
But personal income does include the transfer payment. For example, if you are an unemployed, the government of US does pay you unemployment benefits. If you are disabled due to some, some of the physical or non-physical aspects, those disabilities are also being taken care by many government. So those benefits that you receive, even those are considered your income under personal income. Basically, everything that you receive, that is called personal income. Clear? But whatever you receive, don't you have to pay taxes on it to the government? So
Yes.
after paying taxes, whatever is remaining is called personal disposable income, means something that you can actually spend. So personal income is this the income that you receive, right? And from that, if you subtract taxes, your taxes that you pay, that is called personal disposable income, which is also called as household disposable income. It is the amount that the households have available to either save or spend on goods and services. So now this is the income left after paying to everyone. So now this is what you can do on spending goods and services, or you can save for the future. It is an amount of economic indicator of ability of consumers to spend and save. So if I want to increase the consumer's ability to spend more, what should I do? Should I increase the taxes or reduce the taxes? Very logical and very mathematical now.
Reduce.
I should reduce the taxes. So what will happen? People will get more personal disposable income, which they will spend.
Spend.
Clear? That's what most of the governments do. When they feel that the economy is not running, they should reduce the taxes, not increase the taxes. Is that clear? Clear. Now, if you want to calculate from the national income, personal income, then you will, as I said, national income includes so many things. So you'll have to exclude a lot of things. Now, see here, what are things you will have to exclude? First of all, did we do the national income calculation? Sorry. Yeah. So from the national income, just see what do you think is the only thing which is the personal income? Or what do you think is not a personal income? From the national income, just try to guess. I'm not pushing hard. Try to guess, which means what should be excluded from the national income. Personal income is the income of households, okay? Is it before tax or after tax, by the way? Personal income?
Before tax.
So first of all, should there be tax calculation included in it?
No.
No,
No.
I should remove the tax calculations, correct?
Yes.
I should remove the taxes. Then, what about the profits by the business? Are they part of personal income?
No.
No, even that should be excluded.
Removed.
And what should be added which is not here? Something that should be added which is not here.
Transfer payment.
Very good. Transfer payment should be added. So now see, from the national income, we will remove the indirect business taxes, the corporate income taxes, all the taxes. And undistributed corporate profits means the profits which are not distributed, but add transfer payments. So all those profits which are not distributed, but even that will be removed, but transfer payments will be added back. Is that clear? That's called personal income. And from that, if I subtract just personal taxes, I get personal disposable income, which is nothing but also called as household disposable income. This will tell you that how much is the amount remaining in the hands of people so that they can purchase goods and services. That will spur the economic activity. Clear, everyone?
Yes.
Now I know that there are a lot of these terms which are coming to the play, but once you read one by one, you'll probably get things very much clear. I want you to remember this equation of the expenditure approach and the income approach both, but expenditure approach for more precisely C plus I plus G plus X minus M. First of all, tell me, should the value of GDP from the income and expenditure approach, should they be same or not?
It should be same.
It should be same, right? Now, when you combine both the approach, what happens? Let's see that. So when I combine the income and expenditure approach, very, very important. If you want, you can note it down. I've displayed everything here so that we understand it from the notes point of view. But the total of expenditure approach, what we understood was C plus I plus G plus X minus M. There is no problem in this. The total of income approach now I've taken is C plus S plus T, which is consumption consumer spending, household and business savings. So what household and businesses do, whatever the income that, what happens with your income, by the way? Let's say you make a salary. What happens with your salary?
We spend or we save.
You spend, let's say, $40. Out of $100, you spend $40 for your expenses. Remaining, let's say, $35 you spend for some investments, right?
Yes.
So basically, this is the total amount that you spend on consumption or investments. An investment, basically, you save, right? And the remaining money, why don't you do anything with the remaining money? Because you have to pay taxes on it. Clear?
Yes.
So let's say you are going to pay $25 taxes on it. So whatever income that you generate, out of that income, you pay some portion to the taxes. The remaining you spend or save. That is what the income approach is. So the income approach is basically how much a household like you and me, how much we earn. Well, how do I find this? How much do I earn? I need to figure out how much is that earnings, where is that earnings going into? That is going into consumption, savings, or taxes. Clear, everyone?
Yes.
So if I combine both of this, I know that aggregate income and expenditure approach should be the same. So basically, total of expenditure in the economy, how much you spend in the economy, and how much you earn in the economy. Shouldn't they both be same?
Yes.
So what the entire economy earns and what the entire economy spends, they both should be same. Therefore, total income must equal, I'm saying must, it must equal the total of expenditure. So C plus S plus T should be equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Now let's run some math into this. Now what is the common thing? Cancel out C. What is that is remaining? Savings plus taxes is equal to investments plus G plus
Government.
X minus M, right?
Yes.
And if I only take savings on the other end, what is remaining? How much that, what happens to the money that households and you and I save? What happens with that money? Takes S on the other side and everything else on the other side. What is the other thing remaining there? What is I? Investments by you and me. Plus, what is the other thing? G you have, right? But there on the other hand, you have T. What is G, by the way?
Government purchases.
Government purchases. Now, what will I do? See this. I will arrange G and I will take T from that side and bring it here. So it will become minus T. Now, what is G minus T? G means how much government spends and T means how much government earns, isn't it? Clear? Yes. I just took T from this part and took it here. Yes or no?
Yes.
What is G minus T? G minus T is how much government earns and how much government spends, which is called the fiscal balance. Clear? When the government spends more and earns less, we say it's a fiscal deficit. Are you getting it? Have you heard about all these terms?
Yes.
Clear? So fiscal deficit means government spends more, earns less. And then the remaining you have is net exports, that is X minus M. Now watch out for all these components one by one. So now the savings, what you and I save, is equal to investments plus government borrowings minus, or either government borrowings or government savings, and the trade deficit or trade surplus. So it's a combination of fiscal deficit or fiscal surplus and trade deficit or trade surplus. Trade means international trade. So here I stands for investment, G minus T stands for fiscal balance, and X minus M stands for trade balance. Very important. What does it conclude? It concludes that what you and I, we do savings that is equivalent to investments in the economy, plus what is the government's budget and what is our international trade. Three things: government budget, fiscal balance, international trade, X minus M, and the investments. This is where your savings is, basically going into. Is that clear? I would
Yes.
want you to write down this equation, please. Even if you're watching everything in the notes, please write down this equation. Savings equals to, I've just rearranged it in mathematically. It equals to investment plus fiscal balance plus trade balance. Why am I making you write all this thing? Because we are going to understand some relationship based on this. Okay.
Done.
Okay. Now, let's say you earn $100 and out of that you paid taxes of $20. So how much have you saved?
80.
80. From that 80, if you spend, or no, from that 80, if you do invest of, let's say $50, so the remaining is $30, right? This
Yeah.
$30 you'll be spending in the economy. That $30 will be spent by you, correct? So now what we do, we know that aggregate income and expenditure should be same. So I have just rearranged this equation where I've taken I on the other side. What was I? I was
Investments.
investments, right? So now S minus I, what does S minus I stand for? Savings minus investment. That is the amount remaining for you to spend. Clear? Which is a combination of two things. What? G minus T, fiscal balance, and trade balance. Now you can play with this equation the way you want. What are we going to focus on? What is fiscal balance? Means what should be the government's budget? Are you getting my point? What should be the government's budget? What should it be based on? Two things, S minus I and X minus M, the difference between both. Now tell me, if the government is in deficit, means what will happen? Government is in deficit means government is spending $100 and collecting a tax of only $80.
Okay.
Clear?
Yes.
So can I say G minus T will be greater than 0 or less than 0?
Greater than.
Greater than 0. So if this is the case, how can I balance it out? How can I balance it out? What should be the case? For this part and this part also to be, if your government is keeping on increasing the deficit, then your this part should be higher and this part should be lower. This part should be higher and this part should be lower because that's a subtraction, right?
Yes.
How can the S minus I be higher? By S minus I should be higher by?
See, more
Saving
savings.
should be more or investment should be more?
More savings.
More savings. And how can X minus M be low? I mean, what that entire part
Imports.
has to be low. So what should be the case? There should be
More
more exports or more imports?
More imports.
More imports. So therefore, there should be a trade deficit. Now read this. From this equation, we can say that the government deficit must be financed. Means when the government is not able to make enough money to spend in the economy. Means the government does not have enough money to spend in the economy. Why? Because Government is spending more, but it is not getting enough income. Correct? So when the government is running at deficits, what should happen? It must be financed by some combination of trade deficit, means imports will be more than exports. Or the second thing is excess of private savings over private investments. Means there will be more and more savings and less of investments. Clear? So people will be saving more. And this generally happens when interest rates are high or low. When interest rates are high, people will save more and the businesses will invest less. Getting my point?
Yes.
So just remember one thing, that this equation has to be balanced. So if there is a government deficit, the fiscal deficit, then that will be balanced by higher investments or higher imports. Clear? So that can be balanced by a trade deficit, which is higher imports, or where the private savings are more than investments. Means people are saving more in banks than they are using for investments. Only then the government will get additional funds to manage its fiscal balance. Clear? Right. Opposite will be the situation when the government will be in surplus, then everything will be opposite. Exports will be more, and when government is earning more taxes, that means government is making more money. Then we can do exports more, and then the investments will be more in the economy. Clear? Right?
Yes.
Well, this is what you had to understand. Basically, this equation of C plus I plus G plus X minus M, and income, which is basically where you spend, where you invest, and basically your savings is your investment, and basically what is that you pay taxes, that is C plus S plus T. That is your income, and combining those we get savings, and savings minus investment, we rearrange that, so we get what is the fiscal deficit and how that can be funded by trade deficit. So just remember, fiscal deficit is G minus T, trade deficit is X minus M, and savings minus investment is S minus I. Clear? All this is because aggregate income equals to planned expenditure. Planned expenditure is nothing but where your economy is planning to spend. Clear? Well, this is what we need to remember from the, if you see from the index point of view, this is what we've covered. Now we will be going in detail to cover what happens to the overall demand and supply in the economy, and what are its effects on the components exactly that you saw: consumption, investment, spending, taxes, and all, exports and imports. What are the effects when there is an increase in demand, when there is a decrease in demand, when there is an increase in supply, decrease in supply? What is the effect on the economy, and how it is related to two major things in the economy? What is the two major things that we are going to focus on? GDP and price level. GDP means the total goods and services produced, and price level is nothing but inflation. So if you look from the demand and supply curve, you have price and the quantity, right? Correct? From the microeconomics. From the macroeconomics, that price in the economy is inflation, price level, and the output is nothing but the GDP. Clear?
Yes.
That's what will be our focus.